Welcome to another bonus edition of Upon Further Review. And in this edition, we'll be talking about the division playoff game between the Carolina Panthers and the Seattle Seahawks. And that will be happening on January 10th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and you can catch that on your local Fox affiliates. So you have the Carolina Panthers, the champions of the NFC South, versus the Seattle Seahawks, the champions of the NFC West. So we got the Seahawks are the number 1 seed in the NFC, and the Panthers are the number 4 seed in the NFC, and they're the only team that actually got into the playoffs with a record below 500, with a record of 7-8-1. Say that tie game against Cincinnati. But we'll be going into that more in a moment. Just want to start off by letting those of you who are listening for the first time and watching this video that what's going on here is Upon Further Review, where we do some Madden gameplay, where we play out the game. I pick the game, I play as the team that I'm picking in the game, and that's the Seattle Seahawks. I'm playing as the Seahawks against the Panthers in this Madden gameplay. And while that's going on, I'm going to go over the numbers, inside the numbers and inside the schedules for both of these two teams, and also break down, give some analysis on what I feel is going to happen in this matchup on the division playoff round in this weekend in this game. So, alright, the Carolina Panthers, they started off the season with a win in Tampa Bay. They beat the Buccaneers 20-14, and then they hosted the Lions and they beat Detroit. They beat them pretty impressively too, 24-7. Things were looking up then in Carolina. They were 2-0. They were off to a great start in the first 2 weeks. Although Cam didn't play in week 1, he played in week 2. As I said, very impressive that they put up 24 points against the Lions. But then they went on a 2-game losing streak that started off with the Steelers coming in. The Steelers put up 37 points on the Panthers, and they only managed 19. So they're having trouble scoring in that game against the Steelers defense. And then in week 4, they went to Baltimore, and they lost to the Ravens. Back-to-back losses against AFC North opponents. Similar score, they scored less, and the Ravens scored a little bit more. They had 38-10 was the final score. Then in week 5, they got back in the win column as they ended up hosting the Chicago Bears. It was in Baltimore, and the Ravens won by a touchdown, 31-24. Or the Panthers, what am I saying, the Ravens? They faced the Ravens the week before. The Panthers won that one by a touchdown, so excuse my error there. All right, so then the Panthers went to Cincinnati, and they ended up playing in that tied game. It went to overtime, obviously. That's how you get a tie. But it was 37-37. They both put up a lot of points. And Cam Newton had 100 yards rushing and 284 yards passing. So, and we'll go over the numbers for these two teams as well. And that's the strength of the Panthers, is their running game. As Cam Newton is one of the best running quarterbacks in the league. Of course, Russell Wilson is also very talented with his legs. But in week 7 for the Panthers, they ended up going to Green Bay, and at Lambeau Field they lost to the Packers 38-17, and that was the start of a 6-game losing streak. And if you include that game where they had the tie, that was a 7-game stretch where they didn't win a game. So they actually went from October 5th, where they won against the Bears. They didn't win again until December 7th. So a 2-month stretch where they did not win a game. And that included a loss against the Seahawks. The Seahawks came in. It was actually a pretty tight game. It was a very defensive game. This was the first time these two teams faced off back in week 8, back on October 26th, 13-9. The Seahawks held Newton to just 171 yards through the air. And Stewart was the leading rusher, 79 yards. The rookie, Kelvin Benjamin, had 94 yards for the Panthers. So not a lot of numbers for the Panthers. Like I said, low-scoring game. It was within a score, just 4-point difference. So it's possible we might see a low-scoring game in this one as well, as these two teams are all about defense. Of course, the Panthers haven't been very consistent defensively, whereas the Seahawks have. And really in the next few weeks here that we're about to talk about, that's where you saw their defense really be exposed in week 9 on Thursday night. Against New Orleans in Carolina, the first time they faced the Saints, they ended up losing, and that was 28-10 But then on Monday Night Football, even after having all that time to prepare, they went to Philadelphia, and the Eagles put up 45 points. And the Panthers only had 21. Newton did have 306 yards, though, through the air. But they only managed, Stewart had 36 yards, and he was the leading rusher, so they didn't really get the running game going. And when the Panthers can't run the ball, then they don't win. That's what they need to do to win, and they're going to have their work cut out for them against that Seattle defense, which is very solid against the run. But in Week 11, the Panthers ended up hosting the Falcons, and they ended up losing that one just barely by less than a field goal, 19-17, just a 2-point margin there. Again, they had trouble running the ball. Cam was doing it with his arm. There's some games where he does, he's been putting up some numbers. Of course, he's also struggled as well, against Seattle and against New Orleans. He didn't even put up 200. But then against Philly, he put up 3, and he almost put up 3 against Atlanta, just shy, 292. Then they had their bye week in Week 12, and in Week 13, they ended up going to Minnesota, and they lost to the Vikings 31-13. Again, Cam didn't reach 200 yards in that game. Of course, he's been having his issues too, with the injuries. As in a couple weeks later, he ended up missing another game when he got in that car accident. Although they started their 4-game winning streak heading into the offseason, when that's the thing, actually, after losing those 6 games, I did not think in any way, shape, or form that the Panthers were going to be able to win the South. I thought there's no way. I wasn't really expecting them to have really a big year this year. I thought they were going to have an off year because they seem to be a team that goes up and down. But they actually, instead of doing it on different years, they ended up having like 2 seasons and 1 this year, because after that 6-game losing streak that ended on November 30th, that was the last game they lost, period. They haven't lost since November 30th, because in December they were undefeated. Of course, 3 of those games were against division rivals, and that's the road to the division title, is to beat 3 of your division rivals in the final month, and that's what they did. And it really is impressive, because I didn't give them a chance, and not many people did. I thought the Falcons were going to get it, and then for a moment I thought maybe the Saints, but I really thought Atlanta all along, even at the beginning of the year. But they also had their issues. It was just it was a struggle to get wins for those teams outside of their division, is the thing. But if you look at it, they were going against, Seattle, Green Bay. Those are tough teams. And also going against the AFC North. That was a tough matchup for the NFC South. But on December 7th, in Week 14, they went to New Orleans after having lost to the Saints in Carolina. They go to New Orleans, and they surprised me in that one. They put up 41 points against the Saints, 41-10. Very impressive game. Stewart, 155 yards on the ground. Huge game for the Green Lantern. Then Week 15, back home in Carolina, they beat the Bucs. Close game, but they won it 19-17 by less than a field goal. Week 16, they beat the Browns. The Browns came to Carolina, and they took them out. Another low-scoring game, close one. They won by 4, 17-13. In Week 17, they went to Atlanta with the division title on the line, and they blew out the Falcons. They came up huge, and they earned it to get in the. They earned it. They got the division title, 34-3. And they haven't lost a game, like I said, since November. So they're on a 4-game winning streak, and then they go in and they actually host that game against the Cardinals. Although the Cardinals were 11-5, they had to go on the road because they were a wild card team. Going on the road as the 5th seed to Carolina, and even though it was the 3rd-string quarterback, I thought the Cardinals were gonna win because of their defense. But Cam Newton, although he didn't hit 200. They did enough to get 27 points, and they won the game 27-16. Their defense came up huge. John Stewart, 123 yards on the ground. So not much in the passing, but they ran the ball. They were able, they got also that pick 6. So their defense is playing really good. But now they go to Seattle, and they're going against the best defense in the NFL. The only other team that you could say maybe has a better defense was the Lions, and they're not in the playoffs anymore, so they were definitely the best defense left playing. The Broncos have a pretty good defense too, but the Seahawks are back, and they're hitting it, and they are actually the team that is the hottest right now. They are entering the playoffs on a 6-game winning streak. That's the longest winning streak of any team in the playoffs. They haven't lost a game since November 16th. So the Seahawks are red hot, and they're at home. The 12th man is going to be out in force. It's going to be a sellout crowd. It's going to be loud. They could break records, quite possibly. And it's going to be a heck of a game. These two teams actually match up pretty well. We saw when they faced off earlier in the season in Carolina, 13-9. Of course, I think the Seahawks could win this one by double digits. But let's just go over their season real quick. It took a long time on the Panthers there, but in week 1, the Seahawks went against Green Bay. They might be going against them next week if Green Bay can handle business against Dallas. I think they will, but that's going to be a really close, good game. But check out that upon further review if you want to know our thoughts on that. But they beat the Packers. That was in Seattle. They beat them good, too, by 20 points in the very first game of the season, the opener there back on September 4th. Then in week 2, they actually lost to the Chargers in San Diego by 9 points, 30-21. Then they went back home and they hosted the Broncos in the rematch of Super Bowl 48. It went to overtime. And in overtime, beast mode Marshawn Lynch put it in the end zone for the win. So they won that one 26-20. It was a great game. It was actually a better game than the Super Bowl. Well, I guess the Super Bowl was fun to watch, actually, to see them just dominate the Broncos and watch that defense dominate one of the best offenses in terms of production with, how Peyton set those records, and to watch that defense is so good in Seattle. They're a little bit different this year, but they got all the key components, and the guys that, they were, for the most part, they're pretty much the same, even though they're missing a couple guys, but the guys, were there, they were playing. In the way that Seattle, they interchange a lot of their guys. They get a lot of substitutions in, even though, of course, they just are very, very talented and very, very deep, so they can do that. Even in this gameplay, there was a point where, at this point, you must have seen it on that first possession with the Panthers, because I don't want to spoil it, I didn't want to talk about it, but it was so awesome, I couldn't believe it. The Panthers marched all the way downfield in this Madden gameplay that you're watching, and then you seen the pick six, ran it all the way back. It was awesome. It was like 98 yards, 99 yards, all the way for the touchdown. And then the defense had to come back on the field, and I was actually happy. I was like, hey, now I get to play with some of the guys who are at the second string, but they're actually almost or just as good as the first string. That's how deep Seattle is. But all right, back to their season. Week 4, they had the bye week. Week 5, Monday Night Football. They went to Washington. They beat the Redskins 27-17. Then week 6, they hosted the Cowboys, and they ended up losing that one by a touchdown, 30-23. Of course, personally, I think that could be the other rematch. Either way, the Seahawks win this game, which I am very sure they will. I'd be shocked, actually, if they didn't. But either way, whoever wins against Dallas and Green Bay, it's going to be a rematch because they've already faced them both. Will they beat the Packers for the second time, or will they avenge their loss to the Cowboys is the question. I think the first time around, that game was more that the defense was still getting used to playing with the guys that weren't there, that had gone, through free agency, because they did lose some really good players, although now their defense that they've gotten used to playing as the unit that they currently are, they're just as good. I mean, I don't know. People say they're not, but I think they are. The way they've been playing the last 6 games, especially. We'll get to that here in a moment. But all right, so they lost that game. They said it was still close within a touchdown. But then they went to St. Louis in week 7. They lost by 2 points in a very controversial game where, that fumble could have gone either way. The refs called it how they called it, and they ended up losing. Russell Wilson had a heck of a game, though. 313 yards and 106 rushing. I mean, he tore it up in that game. Then they had the match against Carolina, where these two teams faced off in Carolina. The first time, very defensive game. That was actually the game, too, where you saw, their defense was really finally, just started playing, the way that you expect to see them play. They had those 2 losses, and that kind of just, like after going through those, sometimes you gotta go through some growing pains, and then they showed up, in force in week 8. Then in week 9, they ended up hosting the Raiders. It's kind of a high-scoring game. They won it. They did let up some points though to Derek Carr and the Raiders, but part of that I almost think they took them a little easy. But week 10, the Giants came into town, into Seattle. They beat them pretty handily, 38-17. In week 11, though, they went to Kansas City in a really good game. It was a really tight game. Beast mode, 124 yards. He was tearing it up. But, it was this type of game where somebody had to lose. And, too bad it was the Seahawks. But if they didn't lose that game, they'd be on a 10-game winning streak right now. As they actually won 9 out of their last 10 games. And that game was just a 4-point game, too. So they just barely lost it. And, heck, if you include that game to St. Louis where they lost by 2, they would be on an 11-game winning streak. So you can't really tell me that the Seahawks aren't just as good, if not even better than last year. Because at this point, Russell Wilson is playing better than he was last year, as he's gotten 1 year better. And their defense has gotten 1 year better, even with the guys that left. I said they went through a couple growing pains, those back-to-back losses. The second one was kind of fluky, but hey, even all their losses, the San Diego one was by 9, but then the other 3 were by, a touchdown or less, and then the 2 of them, the 4 points and 4 points. So, and then or 4 points and 2 points, honestly. So anyway, in week 12, they ended up hosting the Cardinals, and that was a huge game. The Cardinals came in, and they beat them. They needed to get that win so they could get the title, and so they could get the number 1 seed. That was like the first step in that process, and it was the first game in their 6-game winning streak, like on their path to this game, number 1 seed, division round, hosting the playoff game. That's where the path began, really, where they really made their push for the playoffs, Already, like I said, you go all the way back to October when that game against Carolina was where they really started playing like they were last year. But that game against Arizona, the first time around, 19-3, shutting them down. That was a beautiful thing. And in week 13, same score against the Niners in Levi's Stadium. And then the Niners were the team last year they faced in the championship. So, that's not an easy win. It was another impressive, performance on both sides of the ball. Week 14, then they went to Philadelphia. And at that time, the Eagles were looked at as possibly being a number 1 seed. They were looked at as at least being, maybe even going to bye and being at the very least, the NFC East champions. But no, the Seahawks went in there and they shut them down. And they ruined their season, really. They never recovered from that beating, as they beat them 24-14, which is an incredible feat again. Like, they'd only let up 6 points in the 2 games prior against the Cardinals and the Niners, but then to only let up 14 against an explosive offense like Philadelphia, where they run so many plays and you're out there so much, that is really quite an accomplishment. Week 15, then they faced off against the Niners in Seattle, and they swept them. They swept the season series. Then in week 16, the rematch in Arizona, and that was for the division, for all the marbles, and they dominated them. They beat them by 29 points, 35-6. It's like explanation point stamp champs. All right, NFC West champions. Then they avenged their loss against St. Louis in week 17 on the final week of the season in Seattle, finishing on a strong note for the regular season and getting ready for the push to go all the way. I'll tell you, it's tough to really go against Seattle. I think they're going to make it to the Super Bowl again. I'd be kind of surprised if they didn't. And that begins in terms of the playoffs in this game Saturday night against the Carolina Panthers. And Carolina can make it interesting. What they're going to have to do is have success in the running game. They got to keep the ball out of the hands of Marshawn Lynch and out of the hands of Russell Wilson. They've got to force the Seahawks into 3rd and long. The problem is, though, even in 3rd and long, Russell Wilson will actually connect, usually with Luke Wilson, for some first downs and keep the drive going. But let's check into the numbers. Let's check out the passing proficiency for both of these two teams. and we look at the passing yards per game for the Carolina Panthers, they were 19th in the NFL. And we look at the Seattle Seahawks, and they were 27th. So both these teams struggle to pass the ball. They don't really put up big numbers. The thing is, though, they actually have something in common, that they both have a lot of clutch passing yards. Both Cam Newton and Russell Wilson, when they do get their yards, they make them count. Even though they don't necessarily get a lot of yards. Of course, a lot of that is too, because a lot of their passes can be like short passes just for a few yards and screens and things like that. Especially the way that they run, their backs. Like, they have them running some screens and short passes, and even their tight ends. They both have very talented tight ends. They got, decent receivers. Of course, Russell Wilson is also known to air it out and pick up some big plays, like, in the right moments. But then we look at the actual passing defense of these two teams that they're going to be matched up against. And the Carolina Panthers are 11th in passing defense. That's actually their strength of their defense, is their pass defense. I think it's just the Seahawks' strength of their offense is actually their running game, which is actually the same thing as the Panthers. These two teams are very similar in the type of style, except the Seahawks just do it better. But the Seahawks, speaking of do it better, they're number 1 against the pass on defense. That Legion of Boom is back, baby. Richard Sherman and Byron Maxwell and Cam Chancellor and Earl Thomas. And that's just the 4 stars. They got other guys too. It's not just them. And I mean, that's just the secondary. Don't forget about that nasty linebacking core that's just very deep. In their line too, they're deep. They're so deep. Their whole team. They got like 2 teams on defense. It's not even fair. Is how good the Seahawks are. It's not even fair. Alright, so let's look at the running offense. And when it comes to rushing yards per game, that's the Panthers' strength of their offense. They're 7th. That's actually something I think would surprise a lot of people. They'd be like, oh, wow, the Panthers are the 7th rushing team? Yeah. They came on strong in those last 4 games, and they ran the ball, and Stewart was doing pretty good running the ball anyway. Cam also can run the ball too. That's why you got to watch out for him. You got to keep an eye on Cam, because he will come out the pocket, and he will run the ball. And that's what the Panthers need if they're going to actually have any success, is Cam's got to have a huge day. He's got to have the game of his life if they're going to win this one. I give them next to no chance. Sorry, Carolina. Seattle is going to dominate this game. Carolina is good enough to make it interesting. They're good enough to make it even go down to the wire. But don't be shocked if Seattle just freaking just destroys them. I would not be surprised at all. But alright, so like I said, they have the 7th rushing offense. Let's look at Seattle with their rushing offense is number 1. Beast mode. That's the thing, is like I said, they're both very similar in the style that they play on offense and defense, except the Seahawks just do it better. They're the class of the league. They're the best team in football. If you don't know, well, I guess you need to go move to the Northwest so you can watch their football games or something. Or go look at the numbers. Go watch some film. Go look at what they're doing. They're killing it. It's a Beast Mode's having a tremendous season. I think he gets overlooked somewhat because DeMarco Murray is having such an awesome year. Beast Mode's tearing it up too. Marshawn Lynch. And like I said, Russell Wilson, he can also get yards on the ground, but he doesn't necessarily, it happens when it happens. It's like Russell Wilson, when he ends up picking up yards, it's usually like 10, 20, 30-yard runs. Like, it'll be in moments where they need it. It'll be in moments where like things just break down, and then he just sees an alley, he takes it and he goes. And it's usually the type of play that's like a game breaker. Like, it opens it up and they end up usually scoring on those drives. He does the same thing with his arm too, but I mean, they can just give the ball to Beast Mode. Just keep giving it to Beast Mode. Give it to Beast Mode. Boom, boom, boom. Pound it and pound it. Even early on, if he's only averaging a couple yards per carry, it won't matter, because eventually the defense will get tired of tackling them. They'll be too tired. And once it reaches the second half, even late in the second quarter, but especially in the fourth quarter, you get into the third and then the fourth, man, at that point, that's when beast mode usually is ripping those runs because he can still go. He'll rip them in overtime. You've seen it when he did that against the Broncos back in week 3. Like I said, beast mode will play 60 minutes plus if necessary. And he's still running in the fourth quarter like it was the first. He actually, like I said, he gets better as the game goes on. And that's pretty rare. But let's look at the defense. When it comes to the defense, the rushing defense of Carolina is 16th. It's actually their weakness. And that's going to be the weakness in this game because they're not going to be able to stop beast mode. And Russell Wilson either, for that matter. But beast mode is going to just run all over them. It's going to be beautiful. And then if you look at the Seattle Seahawks defense against the run, number 3. They're almost as good against the run. Actually, all year long, they were dominant against the run all year. And even, it was actually, surprisingly, it was the secondary that was actually letting up more yards earlier on in the season. Like I say, I think part of that was just because the getting used to their blitzes and the pass rushing and everything, and they were just, like I said, they had to hit their stride. But since they've hit their stride, it actually shows that their secondary is playing like at a freaking all-time high. The fact that they just, over the last 6 games, their secondary has been shutting them down. And so it's going to be more of the same come Saturday night. And like I said, on their run, they don't let it, all year long they've been shutting down the run. As good as Carolina is to run the ball, don't be surprised if John Stewart is held to under 50 yards. And also, I mean, if anything, Cam Newton's going to have to show out. So, I don't know, is he going to? Maybe, but I kind of doubt it. Even if he does have a huge game, which, I mean, Cam, he could, but it won't be enough. Not against Seattle. Sorry, let's look at the points. And when it comes to points scored per game, the Panthers are 19th. They're putting up 21.2 per game. When it comes to Seattle, they're 10th. They're putting up 24.6. So putting up more than a field goal on average over the Panthers. And like I said, they're top 10. Ain't nothing wrong with that. But when it comes to points allowed, the Panthers are 21st. So the Panthers are having they're struggling to let team, keep them out of the end zone. They let teams score. They actually allow more points than they score. Because they allow 23.4 and they only score 21.2. So they actually allow 2.2 more points than they score. That's a recipe for disaster. That's a recipe for defeat. It's a double D recipe. And the Seahawks, they're number 1. They barely allow more than 2 touchdowns. They only allow 15.9 points per game. That means, that's like basically, let's call it 16. Let's call it 16 even. We'll give you the 0.1. You can have 16 points, Carolina. But Seattle's going to put up like 32, 33 points, 34, 35. And I hear 36. No, but, yeah, the Seahawks, they don't let they're number 1 in they're number 1 in points allowed, number 1 in yards allowed, number 1 against the pass, number 3 against the rush. That is an awesome defense. Like I said, I think they arguably are playing even better than last year, but they're just not getting the actual the shine. They're not getting that attention that they were last year, and that actually is something that should scare fans of other teams, because the one thing that maybe would get Seattle to not win would be if they're like just riding too high or if they're too confident. But the thing is, if people are doubting them, they've got something to prove, and you don't want to go against a team that's got something to prove, and they're the defending Super Bowl champions. Forget about it. So yeah, I think Seattle is going to more than likely dominate the Panthers. even though having been said that, and I could sit here and be like, yeah, then I'll end up being like watching the game, and then I'll be like, what's going on? Why is it 10-0 Panthers? What the hell happened? But even if the Panthers somehow end up jumping out to some kind of early lead, which don't be surprised, that will be the only points they're going to score. They better put up as many points as they can early, because that's the only points you get, Carolina. And don't expect no late comebacks, because once Seattle gets going, they don't stop. They're going to keep, once they start putting up points, they're just going to keep putting up points. So Carolina, we'll see what they do early on. That's their only chances to get some early momentum going. But I really don't see them really putting up much against the Seahawks. I guess that maybe they score like 10 points, maybe. They only put up 9 last time. I think they're going to score a lot more than 13. Like I said, I think, expect them to score in the 30s, like 33, 34, 35, somewhere in there. But that's what I'm going to pick for this game. And that's the story I'm sticking with. Seattle in 4 quarters. No overtime in this game. And then the Seahawks, more than likely facing the Packers. Either way, I think Seattle should be making it to the Super Bowl again this year. But that's why they play the games. We'll see what happens on this Saturday and Sunday. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. Very interested to read your thoughts and opinions. Let me know, do you think the Panthers are going to somehow pull off the upset of the friggin' century? Do you think the Seahawks are going to win? Will they win in dominant fashion? Will it be a close game? It very well could be a close game. They do match up pretty good. Like I said, it was 13-9 first time around. Although that was in Carolina. This time, Seahawks probably win by double digits. But let me know, like I said, what do you think? If you enjoyed the video, go ahead and hit the like button. If you want more content such as this, subscribe. As always, thank you very much for listening. It is greatly appreciated. And I hope you're having a good day. Have a great weekend and enjoy all the sports.